Two major wars defined America's fight against communism during the Cold War. Both were fought in distant Asian countries that most Americans knew very little about. Both claimed millions of lives. And in both conflicts, the United States left without the kind of clear military victory it had achieved during World War II. Yet history remembers them very differently. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, while the Vietnam War remains one of the most controversial conflicts in American history. It divided families, fueled massive protests, weakened public trust in government, and forever changed how Americans viewed war. So what made Vietnam so different? Why did one conflict fade into history while the other became a lasting symbol of political and social division? Let's find out. Unlike the Korean War, Vietnam did not begin with one dramatic invasion that immediately drew America into battle. Instead, U.S. involvement grew slowly over many years. After World War II, Vietnam fought to gain independence from French colonial rule. When France was defeated in 1954, the country was temporarily divided into North Vietnam and South Vietnam. North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh, adopted communism, while South Vietnam received support from the United States. American leaders feared that if Vietnam became fully communist, neighboring countries might follow. This belief became known as the Domino Theory. At first, America only sent military advisors and financial aid. But after the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, Congress gave President Lyndon B. Johnson broad authority to dramatically expand military operations. Unlike Korea, however, Vietnam never had the same clear international support or public agreement about why America was fighting. As troop numbers increased year after year, so did the questions surrounding the war. Vietnam proved to be unlike any previous war America had fought. Instead of facing large armies on clearly defined battlefields, U.S. forces battled the Viet Cong, who relied on guerrilla warfare. Enemy fighters blended into villages, disappeared into dense jungles, and launched surprise attacks before vanishing again. American troops possessed overwhelming firepower, helicopters, fighter aircraft, and advanced technology. Yet those advantages often meant little against an enemy that avoided conventional battles. Military commanders focused heavily on attrition, trying to wear down the enemy by causing greater casualties than they could replace. But success became difficult to measure. The war had no obvious front lines, no major cities to capture permanently, and no clear indication that victory was getting closer. As casualties continued to rise, many Americans began asking whether the war could actually be won. By early 1968, government officials continued assuring Americans that victory was near. Then everything changed. During the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, communist forces launched the Tet Offensive, attacking cities, military bases, and government buildings across South Vietnam. Although U.S. and South Vietnamese forces eventually repelled the attacks and inflicted enormous losses on the enemy, the offensive created a powerful psychological impact. Americans had been told the enemy was weakening. Instead, television viewers watched coordinated attacks unfold across the country. Many people began wondering whether government leaders had been telling the truth. Public confidence declined sharply. From that point forward, support for the war continued to fall. Vietnam became known as America's first television war. Unlike previous conflicts, millions of Americans could watch scenes from the battlefield almost every evening. Television showed wounded soldiers, destroyed villages, refugees fleeing combat, helicopters carrying casualties away from the front lines. For the first time, war entered ordinary living rooms. As the fighting dragged on, the images made it increasingly difficult for government officials to convince the public that victory was close. The gap between official statements and what people saw on television continued to grow. That growing disconnect fueled even greater public skepticism. Another event further damaged America's confidence in the war. In March 1968, American soldiers entered the village of My Lai. During the operation, hundreds of unarmed civilians, including women, children, and elderly villagers, were killed. Initially, the incident was concealed, but when investigative journalists uncovered the truth more than a year later, it shocked both the United States and the international community. The massacre became one of the darkest moments of the Vietnam War. It raised serious questions about military leadership, accountability, and the moral cost of the conflict. For many Americans, My Lai symbolized how deeply the war had gone wrong. As the war continued, opposition spread rapidly across the country. The military draft required thousands of young men to serve in Vietnam, regardless of whether they supported the conflict. Many believed the draft system unfairly affected working-class families, while wealthier Americans often found ways to avoid service. College campuses became centers of anti-war demonstrations. Students organized marches. Veterans spoke publicly against the war. Large protests filled the streets of Washington, New York, Chicago, and many other cities. For the first time in modern American history, the nation became deeply divided over an ongoing war. Families argued. Friends disagreed. Communities split apart over whether America should continue fighting. Public trust suffered another major blow in 1971 when the Pentagon Papers were leaked. The classified documents revealed that several U.S. administrations had privately questioned the war while publicly insisting that progress was being made. Many Americans felt they had been misled for years. Soon afterward, the United States began withdrawing combat forces. Without continued American military support, South Vietnam struggled to defend itself. In April 1975, North Vietnamese troops entered Saigon, ending the war and reunifying Vietnam under communist rule. For many Americans, the fall of Saigon became the defining image of a costly and painful defeat. The Vietnam War remains controversial because it was never simply about military success or failure. It was a conflict shaped by political decisions, guerrilla warfare, graphic television coverage, government secrecy, civilian suffering, and growing public opposition. Events like the Tet Offensive, the My Lai Massacre, the military draft, and the Pentagon Papers transformed the war into a national crisis that reached far beyond the battlefield. Unlike the Korean War, Vietnam left deep political and cultural scars that still influence American society today. It changed how governments communicate during wartime, how journalists report from conflict zones, and how the public questions military intervention. More than 50 years later, the Vietnam War continues to serve as a reminder that the consequences of war are measured not only by battles won or lost, but also by the lasting impact they leave on a nation and its people.